I'd like to call the Comox Valley Regional District meeting of December 17th to order. And I'll start by recognizing that we're on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. And I'd also like to read Article 3 of UNDRIP. Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. And then we'll move on to B, in-camera meeting, and I will ask Jake to read the recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendation before the board is to adjourn to an in-camera session pursuant to the following subsections of Section 90 of the Community Charter as they relate to personal information, land acquisition, service negotiations that are at their preliminary stage, and that the in-camera portion would convene immediately following the open portion.
Okay, all in favor? That's carried. And next, can I get someone to vary the agenda for Director Lee? It's item G7. Okay, all in favor? And that's carried. So we'll go to G7, which is the recommendation for bylaw number 595, being Black Creek Oyster Bay Water Service Regulation Fees and Charges Bylaw 2008, Amendment number 9. And is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? No? Okay, that's carried. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. Okay. Drive safe. Oh, yeah. Okay, so we're on to delegations and
Just have the minutes to adopt.
oh, sorry. Oops, yep. Adoption of minutes.
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. Okay, now we're on to delegations, and the Western Canada Marine Response has canceled. And I think they said they would be back in February. So we'll move on to Comox Valley Childcare Action Plan. Maria Stanborough. Thank you. Welcome them to the mic. And just to let you know, you have 10 minutes to speak, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for letting us present today. We're looking for the board to receive this as a report for information. Quick introduction as to who we are. My name is Maria Stanborough. I'm the project lead on this. I'm an urban planner. I've been working in urban planning for more than 10 years, and I work in well-being and sustainability. Also lead on the Sunshine Coast Child Care Action Plan and the City of Surrey Joint Use Agreement, which is looking at child care as well. John Foster.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm John Foster. I'm with John Foster Planning Consulting Group, but I've had 35 years experience with various local governments, primarily in the Metro Vancouver area. And part of my responsibility in most of my positions has been looking at the child care portfolio in terms of child care planning.
And I also want to recognize that we were led by an advisory team. Charlene Gray is here. She's a child care provider and was on the team, as well as Joanne Schroeder, and Kevin Duville is here somewhere, or was here. There he is. And Alan Douglas from the school district, who could not be here tonight, I don't think. He was also there. So they provide us a lot of guidance through the project. Quick background to it. Since 2018, the province of BC has dedicated $1.3 billion to childcare. Part of that was money for childcare action plans. And the City of Comox, or City of Courtenay, the Town of Comox, and the Comox Valley Regional District were successful in securing funding for a childcare action plan. We were hired. We started the project in July of this year, and this presentation is the conclusion of the work. The key objectives on the board there are understanding the issues to providing quality, affordable, and accessible childcare as set down by the province. Those are their key mandates, and to make recommendations as to how to make improvements to childcare. Steps taken, we did research and data collection. there's a lot of detail in the report, which I won't go into at this time. We did community consultations, which included 23 stakeholder consultations, focus groups, surveys for parents and guardians, surveys for childcare providers, workshops with local governments, and I know some people here were at that, as well as for First Nations government. And then we did analysis of it, looking at creating targets for childcare for the Comox Valley, and looking at more underserved at-risk populations, also a mandate from the province, and that included Indigenous, lower income, immigrants, and children with extra support needs. And again, there's more detail on all this in the report. And we came up with 7 key recommendations at the end. Our key findings, and this is, I think, the main takeaway that you'll be looking for, is approximately 81% of children between birth and 12 years old in the Comox Valley do not have access to licensed childcare. So 19% of children do. The stat for across the province is about 18%, so it's on par with the provincial average. It's probably, I would guess, in the last few years, the provincial average has gone up more, so we're probably exactly equivalent to it. When we look at more specifics for children from 0 to 3, birth to 3, approximately 87% of children do not have access to licensed childcare. And so this is where we're seeing a lot of parents scrambling and not able to go back to work. 88% of children between 6 to 12 do not have access to before and after school licensed care. So these are where we're really seeing targets needing to be addressed. In terms of what this looks at in terms of numbers, this is a snapshot for the fall of 2019. We'll talk about staffing briefly because we have 10 minutes, but really it's a snapshot because it depends if staff are leaving one organization for another, if they're leaving the childcare field. So if there is enough staff, there can be licensed childcare offered. If a daycare loses a staff person, they have to then offer fewer spaces, and that's what we found throughout the process. So for birth to 3-year-old, 193 spaces in the Comox Valley for about 1,440 children. So that's a significant ratio. 1 in 7 have access. For children 3 to 5, 741 spaces for 1,690 children. So about 1 in 2.5. I told a friend of mine this, and she said, that's terrible. And I said, that's not bad compared to the other ones. So it's, as a parent, it's very, very stressful. And for 6 to 12, before and after school care, 486 spaces for 4,160 children. So you're seeing a big gap there, approximately 1 in 9. This is a mapping that we did for it, and it's a very visual, simple way to look at where you have childcare, where you don't. This is broken down again in those age ranges, 0 to 3, 3 to 5, and 6 to 12. The dark red areas are where it's more than 20 minutes to get to a childcare service. It shows the ratio in those dark red areas is 1 childcare space to 15. And in the green areas, it's 1-to-1. That's your best outcome. And everything else is in between there. And this PowerPoint will be available for you, and this information is all in the final report, too. I just wanted to highlight this. These are the composite index of at-risk populations. So this is lower income, Indigenous families, and visible minorities. The composite index shows the same part of Central Courtenay as really needing the services, and that came also in the focus groups we did with more underserved families. So this is your part.
Yeah, thank you. And I know time is running short, so I'll try to be brief. So looking at the causes why there are such a deficit in childcare spaces, number one is lack of staff. There's various challenges in terms of retaining and maintaining staff. The wages are low. There's extra training requirements for people doing infant toddler care, and it's a very demanding job with not a huge amount of recognition. Also changing demographics, several big growth in young families in the Comox Valley area, more two-parent working families or working families, and also not having the extended families that can pitch in to provide support. And the system's very complicated to navigate. It's a patchwork quilt of agencies, ministries, jurisdictions that look out for childcare. It's not a seamless, integrated system, and it's difficult for the providers, but it's also difficult for families to really understand how the whole system works. So what we did all the research and came up with, identified the needs, and then we came up with 7 broad recommendations. And the first one was really trying to identify how many spaces do you actually need over the next 10 years in the Comox Valley. And admittedly, we came up with fairly ambitious or aggressive or aspirational targets. What we were looking at is having at least the availability of spaces for the 0 to 6 year group, or 0 to 5, having 70% of those children having the availability of spaces, or the ability to have a licensed child care space. For the school age group, we were looking at 60% of those kids having access to spaces. In terms of numbers, it means that an additional 2,000 spaces for before and after school children would be needed in the next 10 years. An additional 900 full-time licensed spaces for the 0 to 3 group, and an additional 400 full-time spaces for the 3 to 5 group. So those are the targets we're proposing, and we're recommending those be endorsed. And then in terms of moving forward with, implementing recommendations from the report, as well as just coordinating initiatives regarding childcare in the Comox Valley, we're proposing that a joint childcare committee be established for the Comox Valley, with representatives from the local and regional governments, Comox First Nation School District, North Island College, Child Care Advisory Committee, Chamber of Commerce, and other groups. And just because the people on this committee would all have full-time jobs, full plates already in their work program, we thought it was important to have a dedicated position, to have somebody who could really take the ball and run with the direction of this committee. So we're proposing that a child care coordinator position be established with joint funding from the local and regional governments. And then finally, the bottom line is childcare is not a local government responsibility. It's really the province that has the main resources and mandate. So we're providing some broad recommendations really for the local and regional governments to advocate to the province on a number of issues, improved working conditions for the early childhood education staff, streamlined process in terms of making the system more seamless for parents and providers, and advocating for affordable, quality, and accessible childcare, because again, it's a patchwork quilt system. And lastly, the province has recently updated an early years in education framework. So, and one of the key things with the framework is recognizing that the early years is not just 0 to 5-year-olds, but it extends into the school age to 8 years old or a grade 3 level, and that is seen as very positive with the child care advocates. So we think that deserves recognition. So that,
The 7th one.
Oh, I already did that.
Oh, did you?
I did 3 advocacy ones in one. So thank you, and we're open to questions.
Great. Yes, that's what I was going to ask. There are some questions. Director Arbour.
Thank you for the presentation and the work. My kids are just getting out of that zone, but I remember the first few years it was so critical, and I'm on Hornby Island, and we're blessed with good support, but at the same time there's evident gaps, and often that leads families to make difficult choices with one parent maybe suspending their career, or it's a real problem. I do have a question in regards to your ratios and targets. So just my question is, you noted 60 or 70% targets, and so I'm just, and then you also gave us the figure around how the Comox Valley, but I have a question around how we're doing compared to other jurisdictions currently. So both provincially, because I have a question, I'm from Quebec, where there's the $10 a day, and which, yeah. So I just have some question around whether the stats you gave us, like whether we're just completely dismal to the rest of British Columbia, or whether we're near the average, and how the 60 or 70% target was set.
Well, just quickly, in terms of and it's on the face of it, yeah, it looks dismal, but compared to others are dismal too.
Okay, good.
Which is not good news. But there was actually recently, the Metro Vancouver did a study of childcare for all the Metro Vancouver jurisdictions, and you're not too far off the average for Metro Vancouver. It's, some municipalities in the North Shore have, a better supply per capita, and some are worse than you. So, you're not too far off for, the province. I think the national average, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's about 28% of kids have access to childcare. So definitely below the national average. And again, Quebec really helps to boost the
So is Quebec in that 60-70% zone, or are they a little bit lower? Sorry if you don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Quebec does have universal childcare offered, and it's $5 a day, but not every parent can access those ones. They are at those ratios for daycare, full-time licensed daycare.
Yeah.
For before and after school care, we don't have that data from Quebec. We really sort of gauged it based on the interviews with parents, the surveys, what we're hearing, what people were looking for.
Great, thank you so much.
Director Frisch.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I don't think I participated in the survey, but I have a few kids myself, and so the numbers certainly line up with my experience. And something that was outlined in the report a little bit, return on investment type things, is nothing ruins a work day or an opportunity for education like having to drop your kids off at 9 and pick them up at 2:30. I don't know what job that is, but you're lucky if you can make that work. So, and some of the actions that really spoke to me. I mean, I think this is a federal issue or a provincial issue as well, and wading in too deep seems expensive for one, and maybe not necessarily the best way to provide childcare, but looking at licensed childcare programs at some of our facilities certainly seems like it would make a lot of sense, and the advocacy side makes a lot of sense. So I just wanted to share that with the board and say thanks.
Thank you.
Director Grieve.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your report. I know I attended the meeting on September 30, and building on what David was just talking about, 48% of parents with small children need other care other than the 9 to 5 Monday to Friday world. So that's almost half. I just wonder when the world's going to get up to speed with what it actually is right now. And I know that with your survey, at the time there was no response from any of the independent schools, either the French schools or the religious schools. But did you finally get some response from those sectors, or no?
We did get response from one independent school, and I believe, I can't remember exactly the details, sorry. I don't think they're in the final summary, but they were a phone call.
Oh, good.
And so we had an interview with them, and I think they just felt they didn't have the means to provide anything more at this time, but definitely saw the need from the parents.
And also, I know that Alan Douglas was saying that generally speaking, in SD 7-1, 500 kids a year start kindergarten, and this year it was 650. And I know some of the early childhood educators said, well, it was a bit of a bump that went through the snake, because there was a bump there. And also the bit about no child care in the hospital or any of the government buildings. And we just had a preview of our new government building for the regional district on Harmston. And I'm just wondering, was there any thought put towards child care when they built that building? Because I don't remember any
Russell's
discussion
office.
on that.
I was going to say the boardroom. And no, there wasn't.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think, that is an issue that has to be brought to top of mind, I think, when they do these kind of things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Hillian.
Thank you, Chair. I have to apologize. I had a computer problem and didn't actually read the report, so my questions may have been answered if I'd been able to access it. But I'm just curious about in your surveys and in your data collection, we obviously know that there's a childcare crisis. There's been a childcare crisis as long as there's been parents. I certainly experienced it bringing up my kids. But I'm curious about when you cite the numbers of parents who don't have access. Is that based on strictly surveys, or is it based on applications that can't be fulfilled? Because we know that there's a lot of people out there who are getting in-home childcare through relatives or folks down the street and such.
So to clarify that data, it was specifically for licensed daycare.
Right.
So there are lots of other ways people try and address it, and that's often sharing childcare between parents, that sort of thing. We didn't collect the data for that specifically because most of it is a little bit ad hoc, and specifically because the province was looking at us to collect data on licensed care. So that's where the numbers come from. So we did that through the survey for childcare providers, and then interviews and conversations with childcare providers as to what they were actually being able to offer in terms of number of spaces. And then the actual number of children comes from Stats Canada from the most recent census. So it's, we didn't use more current statistical data, again, because we're doing a project that has actually been mandated by the province, and they had very specific parameters, and they wanted us to use 2016 statistical data. So it's really the stats data to current snapshot of childcare providers' licensed spaces.
Okay, so if there's a family, whatever its composition, who has a grandparent or somebody else looking after their kids, and that's working out fine, they would still show up as not having access to licensed childcare because there aren't spaces available?
They would show up in the pure stats number. How we addressed that was by not saying that 100% of children will need licensed daycare.
Okay.
So that's where there's that 30% gap and the 60% gap. That's what addresses that. Some people do not look for licensed daycare.
Fair enough. The other question I had was kind of touches on what Director Grieve was alluding to, whether or not you looked at employer-provided care. I didn't see that among the recommendations or in the list of people who might be on an advisory committee. And I'm thinking of large employers like the hospital, CFB Comox, the school district and such who it strikes me that there are other countries in the world where you drop your kids at the daycare at your employer's place of business.
Mm-hmm. The issue of having employment-centered childcare came up repeatedly through the focus groups and any discussions. And the new building for the regional district was mentioned as why is there not childcare there? So that was mentioned through the discussions. And specifically the hospital was really addressed because there are a lot of parents there who are working shift work. It seemed to be a logical place to have it. So how we made recommendations of who would be on the joint childcare committee. We included in that Chamber of Commerce BIAs because we wanted to bring in the partnership with local businesses through that. And we also included the school district as one of the members. The school district's very, very, very supportive of expanding childcare services and have been very proactive and are actually, I think, working on at least one or two
Lake Trail
applications.
And such,
yeah. So they would be part of the joint childcare committee as a member. In terms of, and the North Island College is also would be on that committee. In terms of the hospital not being on that committee, they could be invited, absolutely. One of the recommendations, I think, in terms of what local governments can do is that the OCP, there can be a policy statement that any government building reflects the needs of childcare by investigating or exploring the opportunities for childcare at any new building sites.
Yeah, I would hope that the Chamber or Economic Development or other such organizations might be involved because I think we want to stay focused on the economic argument for why it makes sense to provide childcare apart from all the other reasons that we know. Thank you.
Director Hamir.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I'm going to echo Director Arbor's comments, like having to piece together multiple sources of childcare for my own kids as they were growing up, a real struggle that really impacted at least my employment while they were really young. And so I do see childcare very much so as an economic development issue when it really limits the ability of a parent to get back into the workforce. So looking forward, I'd love to sort of see how you see costing around the child care committee and the coordinator. Would that be a full-time coordinator or part-time? What are you thinking of in terms of that position?
So we've had quite a bit of discussion about that between the two of us, understanding that would be an area of concern. So what we understand for the Joint Child Care Committee, it would be something like a committee of these representatives, not necessarily a paid extra position, and it would be a group that meets quarterly or something like that to review it. Well, and as John mentioned, what we know is that these are all very busy people. So the paid staff position that we're looking at is to make sure that the childcare concerns and needs don't get lost or fall off the table, kind of thing. In terms of, would it be a full-time position? How would it be paid? Our recommendation is that it would be paid through a partnership of the local governments. And whether that's full-time, part-time, however you define it, again, that would be up to the local Joint Child Care Committee to really determine that. You want to add to that?
Yeah, and I think I'd just echo what you said. I think we wanted to keep it, deliberately a little flexible because you have a better sense of what you can accommodate, at the local and regional levels than we do. And we wanted to put in the principle that, you really do need some dedicated position. And, we have debated, is it really enough work for a full-time position? Maybe not, but if there was some other social planning type duties added to it, maybe there would be. So we purposely left it fairly flexible, and it's not a cop-out, but we didn't, we think that it was the best way to go.
Okay. And my second question is more around your comments about the lack of staffing and the wages for childcare workers. It's a huge problem from what I understand. And I'm wondering what can be done other than advocating to other levels of government for subsidizing those childcare costs. Like, I know it's a big burden to be retrained in early childhood education and then to only be paid $17 an hour. Are you seeing other solutions from other communities?
Well, this is one of the thorniest problems that we faced, and it's not just Comox Valley; it's province-wide. We haven't seen any fabulous best practices, but we put in the report is affordability generally for low-paid childcare workers is an issue. So if we threw in an example, if you're doing affordable housing strategies, maybe there's an ability to target some affordable housing that's being negotiated in the area for people in the childcare sector. Okay. I mean, that was one of the ideas we had for the local district. But probably it's the advocacy is the main thing you can do.
Okay, thank you.
And I just add that it's a really, it is a fragmented, complex system. So we do list things that local government can do to support childcare in general. So if you do get a community amenity contribution of a childcare space, and you can rent that to a childcare provider for a nominal fee, then that frees up money. And so it's all kind of a interlinking jigsaw puzzle of where the costs go, where the expenses go, who pays, and how to minimize those costs, and what can local governments do to help with that.
Thanks.
Director Frisch.
Yeah, thanks again. So, if I get my wish and we get some sort of affordable housing program off the ground, hopefully it includes a daycare space, and how amazing would that be? But I wanted to get your thoughts on this suggestion that we could create policy, bylaws, or regulations. And I didn't notice anywhere if any examples of that, maybe I missed it, but are there any simple examples you can tell us about a bylaw or a regulation or a policy that we could create to encourage creation of childcare spaces?
Well, some jurisdictions have standalone childcare policies. Like some cities have a childcare policy. It's really a value statement of the local government saying that childcare is important. It has the social benefits, economic benefits, and just lists that it's a priority for the local jurisdiction to encourage childcare. And it's kind of your just umbrella document. And then in the OCPs, there's ability to have some specific statements about the value of childcare, but also the intention of actually looking at securing childcare through new development. Some of the things we talked about today in public facilities, zoning bylaws, making sure that childcare is there's opportunities for providing childcare throughout municipalities. There aren't excessive hurdles or red tape or bureaucratic problems for establishing childcare. It's really, there's a lot of things that cities can do just to facilitate childcare that really don't cost money. And it's happening in quite a few, especially like the larger municipalities that have had more experience with it.
We did a workshop for local government representatives, and there were examples in that, and we can make that available to everyone on the board if you weren't able to attend. Absolutely, because that gives, and I feel like John's being a little modest. He's been involved with some very forward, proactive childcare plans in Burnaby, in Richmond, and he has great examples of the work.
Yeah. That being said, we realize that you probably don't want us to come saying, hey, adopt a City of Vancouver mechanism for the Comox Valley. So, we're trying to tailor our recommendations to fit, that will work for you.
Okay, great. Well, I'd look forward to receiving that information.
Okay.
Thanks.
Director Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's a really interesting presentation. I wanted to echo what Director Amir was saying about this being an economic development issue in the same way that affordable, accessible housing is an economic development issue. If you don't have affordable, accessible childcare, then you're not going to see the employees you need and the kind of business development. Are you aware of any communities or regions where their economic development agency or office has taken a lead role in helping to coordinate that for the community? Just
personally, no.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a growing recognition in local governments where the economic development staff or the office is they recognize exactly what you're saying, and so 20 years ago that might not have been the case, but now I think it's widely appreciated and recognized that this isn't just something that's a social issue. It's in terms of really creating a quality of life, a complete community, with the economic and the social benefits.
okay. All right. Thank you.
Director Hamir.
I'm wondering if you have seen examples of communities that have like park and rec services where they have after-school programs, and if those programs are able to meet some of those after-school childcare needs, and how that can, because I'm just thinking of other ways, like if you're having issues with, the traditional childcare model, is that a way that a community could also support by providing and more of those sort of activities after school, particularly, that can absorb some of those childcare needs?
Absolutely. I think that it is happening. It's quite common for recreation departments to be working with the childcare sector and trying to meet those needs. It's again, the whole childcare is a patchwork quilt, so the ideal is to have the availability of licensed spaces available for every child who needs it, but that's not the case now, and so libraries step up. Recreation departments step up, and there's summer camping programs. There's all sorts of ways that families try to make it work, and recreation is certainly a part of it.
Okay, seeing no more questions, thank you very much for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. And all in favor of receipt? And that's carried. So we're moving on to reports. Committee of the Whole, November 26th. And is there any discussion on the report? Or sorry, on the receipt of minutes? All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. And moving on to Electoral Areas Service Committee. The minutes, any discussion on them? All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. And I will get Jake to read the recommendation.
Thank you. Recommendation 1 is for a development variance permit to decrease setbacks for an accessory building at 1750 McDonald Road.
And is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried.
Recommendation 2 is for another development variance permit to decrease setbacks for the purpose of converting an accessory building into a dwelling at 2632 Rampion Road.
I'll move it.
Thank you. And is there any discussion? All in favor? And that's carried.
Recommendation 3 is for a development variance permit to decrease the setback for the utility buildings associated with the new Comox Valley Regional District Water Treatment Project at 1750 Comox Logging Road.
Okay. Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? No? Okay. Carried. Moving on to recommendation 4.
Thank you. Recommendation 4 is for a development variance permit to reduce setbacks for a carport at 60 Salisbury Road.
Any discussion? All in favor? And that's carried.
And recommendation 5 is for a development permit for a commercial industrial building at 3771 Island Highway South.
Any discussion? All in favor? Carried.
And recommendation 6 is to give first and second readings to a bylaw to amend the zoning for a property on Wilford Road to enable a 3-lot subdivision.
Any discussion? All in favor? That's carried.
Recommendation 7 is to amend the CVRD ticketing bylaw to include reference to the regulations and fines provided in the new Comox Valley Regional District Rural Zoning Bylaw.
Any discussion? All in favor? Carried.
Recommendation 8 provides direction for the funding structure split between Community Works funds and short-term borrowing for the additional capital upgrades to the King Coho wastewater treatment plant.
Any discussion? Oh, yes. Director Frisch.
I do have a question, and if staff think this is better for another time. I'm just wondering if there's any insight into this wastewater treatment service and how it works on a financial function compared to ours.
I can answer. King Coho was a private utility that was managing its own wastewater service. It recently converted to a regional district service, so we've just taken it on. So it's a local service area, and only those that are connected to the system pay. We receive from the service area funds that help pay for the staff time that is required in order to fulfill the maintenance, planning, and other obligations to the system. So no association with the sewage commission, or no subsidy or otherwise provided by our other services to it. It's an independent system.
I was thinking more of the dollar per flush number.
That would take a little more research.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, for another time then. Thanks.
And no further questions, so all in favor? Oh, wait, sorry, Director Arbor.
No, just for the director's benefit, I think is it 45 or units that we have there? So just to give you an idea, there's 45.
Yeah, I will look, so
Yeah. Okay, good.
And all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried.
So recommendation 9, related to the previous one, respecting King Coho, is to amend the King Coho parcel tax to $1,786, $1,786 per strata lot.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried.
And recommendation 10 is to establish a future expenditure reserve fund for the King Coho wastewater service.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried.
And recommendation 11 is a $20,000 funding allocation to support investigations into service options concerning drainage in the Saratoga beach area.
All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried.
And lastly, from the Electoral Area Services Committee's recommendation 12, which is a $60,000 funding allocation to support public communication and approval processes for a potential rural garbage and recycling collection service.
All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And we're on to Sewage Commission. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Okay, any discussion on those? All in favor? Carried. All in favor? Carried. And Committee of the Whole, December 10th, minutes. Any discussion? All in favor? That's carried.
And recommendation 1 from the Committee of the Whole is to direct minor changes to the transit fares and past programs effective April 2020.
Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried.
And recommendation 2, direct staff to encourage collaboration between users of the exhibition grounds, including the farmers market, to minimize disruptions to their events.
All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. You got that?
Yep.
That's carried.
And recommendation 3 is allocates a portion of the chair's remuneration to the vice chair in recognition of the position's role and duties.
All in favor? And that's carried.
And recommendation 4 provides that the board write to the provincial government to express support for 2 resolutions brought forward by the City of Victoria to ensure safer drug supply and provide inhalation sites.
All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried.
And recommendation 5 provides direction for the board to write to the province to recognize the Forbidden Plateau Reclamation Society and request appropriate signage.
All in favor? Any opposed? Carried.
Thanks.
And recommendation 6 from the Committee of the Whole is to provide a letter of support to the Kamugway Cultural Society for their efforts to carve and raise a totem pole honoring missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited.
All in favor? That's carried. And on to UBCM grant funding proposal. And should we describe the proposal, or it's
Just receive. We can do that.
okay? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. On to the recommendation. Sure, go ahead.
And the
read it.
recommendation is to authorize staff to make an application to the Union of BC Municipalities Community Emergency Preparedness Fund for flood mitigation planning for the CVRD electoral areas A, B, and C.
All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried.
I know I ask this question every time, and I'm sorry I missed my opportunity.
Oh, okay, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. And so are we working with the City of Courtenay to create a plan together, or is Courtenay not involved in flood mitigation planning? Maybe that's a question for my staff, but I don't know if our staff at the RD are aware of that.
Sure, I'll just ask, maybe Doug DeMarzo, can you comment on this one, or is it Scott Smith? Yeah.
Yeah, my
Thank you.
understanding was we were working together to share information for flood mapping, but I wasn't sure about the preparedness portion.
Okay.
So this would be then the next stage. So right now, we're doing the flood coastal mapping.
Thanks.
This would be a potential next stage. We're doing the coastal floodplain mapping data research, and we're working with the City of Courtenay as well as other jurisdictions on that.
Yeah.
That this would then go to working with that data, having a public process within the electoral areas, and about what regulations we may wish to consider amending. So the city, because you would be under your own jurisdiction, would have to, the data that we're working on now will be available. But as far as, having a public process with your your residents and any regulations you may wish to consider
Well, yeah, I think this is an interesting one for us to follow in Courtney and possibly Comox as well, because we may want to do, make similar changes to our zoning
Yeah.
bylaws and so on. So
And this is us applying for the grant. If we're successful, then we can work out the detailed scope of work.
Wonderful.
And we'd certainly be, of course, we would be in touch with member municipalities and where they are in this type of work.
Okay, thanks very much.
But the regulatory bylaws that the board would potentially consider would only be, or would be for the
Would only apply to
electoral
their,
areas, yeah.
sure. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry about the timing on that.
No problem. And no further questions? Okay. So moving on to long-term borrowing security issue, spring 2020. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. There's a recommendation.
The recommendation is that bylaw 603, being the Comox Valley Regional District Security Issue bylaw 603-2019, be forwarded to the board for first, second, third readings and final adoption.
And Director Grant.
Just wondering, this seems like a lot of money, and I understand how it's allocated, but could you just run me through the process of, let's say that we were going to do some work to the rec center or one of the buildings. Does that come back to us to say, here's what we're doing, here's the amount of money, or are we basically giving you carte blanche on 19 million bucks?
I'll ask our CFO, Beth Dunlop, to come forward and answer that question. Thanks.
So just so I'm caught up, we're on the security issuing bylaw, right? Report? Is that where we're at? Okay. So the long-term borrowing, the loan authorization bylaws are all done through public assent process way back in the early stages of these projects. And then we use just temporary borrowing along the way. And then when it comes down to this is how much money we know we actually need, based on what we've paid back through the interim financing process, then we have to enter into a security issuing bylaw. So it's all through the financial planning process all along the way, and this is just kind of the final step where we could say to MFA, we're ready to lock in. So does that help?
Yeah, that actually makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, and all in favor of the recommendation? Any opposed? That's carried. On to Municipal Finance Authority. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried.
And the recommendation before the board is that Director Grieve and Director Hamir be appointed to the Municipal Finance Authority as member and alternate member respectively for a one-year period.
All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. On to bylaws and resolution, first and second reading. And the first one is recommendation for bylaw number 593, Rural Comox Valley zoning bylaw number 520, Amendment 1. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And we're on to number 2, bylaw number 605, being King Coho Wastewater Service Future Expenditure Reserve Fund Establishment Bylaw, 605. Any discussion? Director Frisch?
But I just, it came back to me. I think the requisition was for about $1,700 a year. Is that right for that system? The parcel tax, and was that just 1 year? Or is that like every year for yeah? No, it's sorry. He's saying every year, but you're saying no.
Excuse me. Through the chair, the parcel taxes for 2020 is for $1,700, and then there will be a revised amount brought forward for subsequent years. It's my understanding.
Right.
Just to be clear, there is a parcel tax charged every year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it does seem quite steep compared to what the sort of the charges we're looking at in our service. I would assume we don't generally charge out $1,700 a year. It's more. Okay. Sorry, I realize this might not be the best time, but it's just interesting to know what other systems are costing, and this one does seem quite costly from my perspective. But that's true. We could just bring them into this.
Okay, all in favor of first, seconded, oh, sorry, Director Arbor.
I was just going to say that this issue was quite debated at EASC, obviously, and I don't disagree with you. It's a steep cost, but I mean they are facing some significant capital upgrades in a small system, and hopefully they'll continue to benefit from that for years. But you're right, it's a hard one, but it has to be done if that system's going to continue.
Thank you. So first, second, and third reading?
Just first and second.
Sorry, first, second, that's right. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And on to, what are we on?
607. Number 3.
Thank you. Bylaw number 607, Comox Valley Regional District Municipal Ticket Information Bylaw 104. All in favor? That's carried. All in favor? And that's carried.
Not yet.
Okay. On to number 4, bylaw number 601, CVRD Financial Plan and Capital Expenditure Program Bylaw 577. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. All in favor? No. Carried. Do we get, yeah. Do we get first? That was Director Grant and Director Frisch. Okay, all in favor? That's carried.
We did.
Okay, number 5, bylaw number 603, Comox Valley Security Issuing Bylaw. All in favor? That's carried.
Second, third.
All in favor? It's carried. All in favor of adoption?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you. It's carried. On to bylaw number 606, the King Coho Wastewater Service Parcel Tax Bylaw 563. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you. All in favor?
Move final adoption.
Carried. All in favor? That's carried. And final adoption for, oh, right, we did that one with Director Lee. So we're on to new business and new business notice. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. So we're on to the recommendation. Yes, thank
The
you.
recommendation is to schedule a public hearing on January the 22nd, 2020 at 7 p.m. at our new office building on Harmston. And it also provides for the delegation of the public hearing to the electoral area directors, which we do require the nomination of names for that.
Okay, any discussion? Director Hamir.
I'll recommend Director Grieve as chair. And I don't know if Director Arbor wants to come all the way.
Director Arbor.
Yeah? Are you okay for
Yeah.
first vice chair?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? Would you like to speak?
Don't do it
Next thing you know, he'll want to sing.
Director Grieve?
No, I'm just waiting for some new business chance to bring forward.
Okay. We did all in favor? That was carried, okay. So on to grant and aid.
Second.
All in favor? And that's carried. And there's, okay, we'll read out the requested action.
The requested action is to provide for a grant and aid to the Comox Valley Therapeutic Riding Society in the amount of $1,700.
All in favor? And that's carried. And on to Green Municipal Fund Council letter of support. Okay. Director Arbor, would you like to speak to it? No? Okay.
Drag this out.
Yeah. So this one is actually, no, I should speak to it because if you've read, I do have interest in the position, but any of you could also have interest in the position. And if so, I would not ask the board to endorse this just for the process of fairness. But if none of you are considering to run for this position, then I believe a resolution from this board would enhance my application.
Okay, so we're just in favor of receipt now. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, we'll read the requested action.
That is to provide a letter of support for Director Arbor's application to serve as the BC representative on the Green Municipal Fund Council.
All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And we can move in camera.
No, sorry.
Oh,
I'd like to-
sorry. Director Grief.
I don't want to belabor this meeting, but I thought
Yes.
I'd better give everybody a quick verbal update on the Western Economic Solution Task Force. As you know, I was back in Ottawa on the 27th, and I've been waiting for a press release to come out because I'm not sure what was actually in camera or in confidence. I did attend the BC caucus meeting where Al Khmer, who's the president of the Alberta Association of Municipalities, attended. There is now, they did release a very quick little press release that said about too many Western communities are struggling through economic downturns fueled by unstable commodity pricing, turbulent trade markets, and other forces. No order of government has been closer to real life impacts on Canadians and municipalities, and no other government order of government has a stronger track record in pulling things together. Anyway, the Western Economic Solutions Task Force was formed basically after the last election on November 8th in the wake of the fact that the Prairie provinces felt they had no representation. And of course, that was evident at the meeting. But Al Khmer was always spoken very highly of by Arjun Singh, who was the UBC president. And he has a lot of time for Al. So Al came to the meeting. Maya Tate, who had just got off a red-eye flight, she addressed it very well. She said that, BC is also facing some of these same issues, and that there were 7 sawmills have closed down. Over 17,000 BC workers have been laid off that are directly working in that industry, and then all the subsequent layoffs that are going to be happening later. So obviously there is some argument for the fact that BC needed representation. They went around the table at the caucus meeting, and I was first up. So I looked at Al and I said, I bet you think that this is not much more than a BC filing a hurt feelings report, I said. And it sort of loosened everything up a little bit. And I did recognize the fact that the Prairie provinces are 18.8% of the population of Canada. BC is 13.1 on its own. So I said I can understand the concern that we might swamp your boat. But I did think that we needed, some representation. And then at their inaugural meeting, they actually did include Maya Tate, who is our president of UBCM this year, as well as Garth Frizzell, who is the first vice president of FCM. And we also had Surrey's Don McCallum and Vancouver's Kennedy Stewart nominated as voting members as well, representing the big city mayors. So we do get representation. Obviously, there's there's a lot of things they want to invest. Most is around things like the rural-urban divide, commodity resource base, barriers to market, and a balanced approach to climate change. We talked about the fact that the growth in international trade in 2017 was 3.7%. Last year it was 1.7%. So we can see what's happening to these things are circumstances beyond our control. But the long and short of it is, I know that the board, when I was away, passed a resolution to write a letter, and I think we've got a little bit of traction on that. So I don't know if you're actually going to send a letter, but I think that the Western Economic Solution Task Force is precisely what it says. It's a solution-based discussion, and it's only a task force. So it gets to report out at our convention in June. So we'll see what falls out of that. That's my report.
Thank you for your report. And Director Arbour?
Excellent report, thank you. And we did discuss it when you were away and passed a resolution to send a letter. I still see a need for it. Where is Maya from? From Souk.
Island Girl.
Okay, I withdraw my comment. Then I was going to say I thought she was actually from the interior, because my comment is the coast needs some representation. I see the issues on our coast as quite different in the interior. The closure of the sawmills in the interior were foreseen about 15 years ago. We knew we were going to have a huge amount of mountain pine beetle harvest, and we knew the cycle was going to end about starting 5 years ago. So it was a huge bump, and it favored a lot of sawmills. On our coast, it's a structural problem that we're facing, and I see it as quite different. So I'm glad there is a coastal voice at that table, and not just the interior. So thank you for your efforts, and perhaps indeed, unless others feel like we should still send a letter, maybe that's something we could park and save staff some time.
Director Grieve?
Yeah, I think in the heat of the election, there are a lot of people all worked up about and rightfully so, because Alberta pays huge balance payments to the Canadian economy, even though they aren't in the gravy like they used to be. One little side thing was Don Iverson, Mayor of Edmonton, was up, had a meltdown on stage because he was representing big city mayors at another governance task force that's going forward. And somebody got up and said, why do the big city mayors have so much clout? And he just said, I'm directly represented by 1 million people in my community, and that's why I'm offended that you would think that we don't. And he stormed off and went down the hall muttering and whatever. But later on, after we all got to know each other a little better, and sitting at a table with representatives from Newfoundland and Labrador, they go, so you think you got it tough, do you? So at the end of the dinner, at the end of the conference, Mayor Iverson got up and said, I love coming to these events. I like to keep a low profile. So I think everybody's looking for a respectful climb down. Everybody's starting to, settle down, because we're local government officials, and we're a little different than the ones that are cut from the cloth of the big boys. So we have to work together.
Okay, and I just confirmed that the letter has been sent, so.
It's all good.
Director Hillian?
I'd just like to move a receipt of Director Grieve's report, and with thanks to him for his reporting and taking part in the meeting.
Thank you. All in favor of that? That's carried. And I think we move into in camera. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.